afternoon for many of you, maybe evening for some of you. We're very excited to have you all here today to learn more about manufacturing your products. A few housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available after we've ended it. As always, we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Do try and gear your questions towards a broader audience so that all attendees can benefit. If you do have a very specific question about your product, we might not address it here, but you can absolutely connect with us after the webinar. Joining me today is Michael Murphy from Aero Electronics. We are incredibly excited to have Michael with us, as he is the Vice President of Global Manufacturing Services at Aero and comes with a ton of knowledge. As some of you know, Aero is one of Indiegogo's entrepreneur services partners. Through our joint partnership program, the Aero Certification Program, Aero, Indiegogo, and our cloud partner, IBM, provide entrepreneurs like yourself lots of tools that you need to bring your technology ideas to life. What you might not know is that the Aero Certification Program does provide education and resources to entrepreneurs at any stage in the product development process, from ideation all the way through production. In prior webinars, we've discussed earlier stage topics like prototyping and design. Today, we're excited to have Michael talk to us about manufacturing. So with that, I will pass off to Michael to give a little introduction to Aero and dive into our topic on Manufacturing 101.
Great. Thanks, Nisha. Absolute privilege. Looking forward to walking through the session and certainly look forward to some of the Q&A as we get towards the end. So I have the great privilege of leading global manufacturing for Aero Electronics. I spent some time in technology and had previously founded and successfully sold a technology manufacturing group of my own. I used to be a pretty big supplier and client to Aero, and now I have the privilege of working with both our enterprise and our emerging account base. So very much looking forward to this session, and we'll move in now. So Aero used to be a simple electronics distributor. We started a long time ago. In 2019, Aero entered into a period of significant acquisition and we really enjoyed a success. We grew our offering from semiconductor distribution to a full service, a full product lifecycle model where we work from design through physical, so getting from a concept to prototype. We support scale manufacturing, and we also support end-of-life services, repurposing, recycling. So if we talk a bit about the Aero platform we put together, we recognize that companies need solutions. Back in the day, Aero could have sent a data sheet to an engineer and that would have been value. We recognize the market's changed. So we're very familiar and on a regular basis put tailored programs together for enterprise and emerging customers who need prototype design and supply chain support. We've really transformed our offering to not only support the enterprise, but really to focus on the growing number of entrepreneurs who are pioneering, innovating new technologies and new markets. So by design and probably some luck, we anticipated a number of things. The introduction of the smartphone, connected devices, IoT, and by virtue of being here with you folks today, crowdfunding. We haven't stopped there. As we look to the next wave, we're looking at things like AI as some of the next macro trends, and we hope to posture ourselves there as well. All right, so looking for the next 25 or 35 minutes as we move into the detail around manufacturing. Prep for manufacturing. All right, so this is a question that we see quite a bit. How do we know that my product's ready? And I don't want to sound too remedial, but I kind of tend to go to a checklist. In fact, even in our prototype and our production business units, we look at a checklist for kind of readiness stage all the time. Number one, have you prototyped and does it work? That's a big indicator. Is your bill of material stable? Have you included alternative parts Have you created an AVL and an alternative vendor list? Do you anticipate it changing or any other reps? Do your design files work? All right, so have you developed Gerbers or step files for your mechanicals? Do you have revisions? Do you understand how to rev control and tie things together? Testing is an area that we hope that our clients, think about, and we're certainly happy to help them. But I think you should really think about test planning. Have you built prototypes? Have you done pre-production quantities? It's real important to recognize that making something once versus thousands of times is a very different animal. Does your device work as intended? All right, so you don't want to get into production knowing that there could be an issue. Field recalls are very costly, undermines the integrity of the product and a lot of the good work you've done. So, is the firmware solid? Is the power supply good? Are the mechanicals good? I think if you take a step back and assess those different elements, you get a good feel for the readiness of your product. So let's talk a little bit about timeline. Next to is my product ready? We hear, what is the timeline to produce a part, to get to production? So I think about this as milestones: product concept, ideation, which is getting through some iterations of figuring out what it is you're going to build, that prototyping, the pre-production process, iterate that pre-production process, and then a move into rate production. All right, the cycle begins with the next vision or idea to support your business's growth. The big factors that I see in the day-to-day that drive your timeline or your velocity through the process is budget and the innovator's experience in that particular market or in their capability their technical capability. Some of the products that I've designed about 4 or 5 years ago are just now getting into rate production. And these were aerospace products, but typically we're seeing somewhere 12 to 18 months as a typical timeline. Around our supply chain partners, so we have budget, we have your technical expertise, and then through this entire process, I can't stress enough, find some partners early on who are going to help you, okay? So, here at Aero, I know we have about 500 sales folks. I think we have maybe 100 who focus on emerging clients, and I know that they're excited to spend time in incubators and accelerators and connect a lot of dots. So as you get through this process, Aero, any of the other formidable electronics and distributors, link up and find those people who are going to help you. It's going to drive velocity. Okay, so, Aero manufacturing has exposure to several hundred products at any point in time, and that number continues to grow. Each of these companies have engaged with us for probably 6 to 18 months before we really get into production and discussions around production. So some of the factors that impact timeline are cash and expertise of the owners. We talked about that a little bit. But the other things you want to think about is how well did you pick the technology you're using? Did you choose a processor that was super cheap, but it's going into life and it's sourced in remote parts of the world and not mainstream? Or did you put something that's at the beginning of its life cycle on the board? So that's, that designing, I think, for supply chain up front is real important. And also, how early did you find and settle on partners? Okay. Now, your product itself also dictates the timeline. Are you going to build an anti-gravity device or stock prediction machine? That's probably going to take longer than building an IoT, pet toy. All right, so think about the scope and scale of what it is you're bringing to market, and look at your timeline through that lens. Okay, so knowing what we don't know. what are the resources that you'll need now and later? So in reflecting on this before the call, I think that the resources that you need are going to change with your stages of development. So for a full life cycle, here are some of the things that I'd consider. There's electronics and electromechanical considerations, and we could even include plastics and metals in that. So we spend a lot of time, or at least an observation I have, is our emerging accounts spend a lot of time talking about the electronics, and they might back burner the mechanical assemblies, the packaging of that electronic board. For instance, just this week, a product that we're bringing to market, we are able to review the mechanical portion of it and offer design for manufacturing that about half the cost of their injection mold tooling. So, as you're considering your supply chain partners, your contract manufacturing partners, those are the things that you're going to want people who can look at your product through these lenses. Your supply chain matters. Okay, so design with supply chain in mind. You're going to do that by, at an early stage, picking some good partners who can guide you and introduce you to the components early in the life cycle. Finance, having launched a company and successfully sold it myself and participating in a couple of other entrepreneurial endeavors, I could tell you that, financing, get lots of it. Get introductions to PEs if appropriate for your market. And, as you're picking your partners, be transparent and look, and seek favorable terms. Okay. Around the quality side, I think you need to consider your quality resource. All right, so there's certainly a supplier element to quality. How are you managing and governing your inbound quality? But you also need to be postured to support your customers' request for quality, concerns about your product, about your supply chain. And then, I think we touched on testing just a bit, but I think testing is another element that is probably overlooked, and we should probably, look a little earlier into the entire cycle, and that's the design of your test. Is it an end-of-line test? Is it a circuit test? Is it a device that needs to go up and talk to the cloud and get configured, which might play a part in what geography you decide to manufacture? Maybe a Verizon or AT&T cellular device is more easily configured domestic, and that erodes the that perceived savings of manufacturing in Asia. So, also around that, the testing, not just the design of the testing consideration in the pricing proposal, but it's also the fabrication of the test hardware. So those are things that I think you're going to want to find partners to help you with. Now, you can always choose to do these things yourself, all right? But this would assume you have the budget, the desire, and, from my own experience, the time is probably one of the most critical elements as well. One thing that's not on the slide that I think you should consider is, as you're picking your resources, as you're picking these partners, look at them through a lens of, can they help you in routes to market? All right? And I would do that at every stage. Okay, so moving on to our next slide. Let's talk about do-it-yourself versus outsourcing, okay? So you can manage engineering, quality tests, supplier development, and sales on your own, all right? Again, having founded a company, I know that only works for a little while. I actually have a good friend of mine put together what he thought was going to be a pretty thriving organization, and it turned out to be more of a lifestyle company, and that works for him. He actually installed home theaters. So he would go out and sell his service. Then as he acquired customers, he would, in a small team, perform the installation. And as he was performing the installation, his sales would drop because he was not out selling the service. And he would then have to go out and sell the service, and that cycle just kept repeating. So we'll keep that in mind. We'll come back to that in a bit. So there's a do-it-yourself option, okay? And I don't know how, I think you'd have to be incredibly well-funded, have a lot of expertise, and be able to pull serious talent from a broad number of disciplines to put a vertically integrated product realization group together nowadays. So thinking about outsourcing options, we listed a few here, and we'll touch on these. So there's kind of an emerging market for contract supply chain companies. So these aren't contract manufacturers, but these are companies who will say, give me your design. I'm going to go to my sources, which could around the world, and then I'm going to come back to you with a price for your product. And that's very easy, very hands-off for you folks. But I see a lot of it is done in secret or with a protected network of suppliers. And depending on your market, that might work. Some of the shortcomings there are a lot of your customers, if you're going to sell if your products to go onto a shelf at Best Buy, they're going to want to know what your entire supply chain is. And it better be of control and integrity. So those contract supply chain companies, they have a fit in a spot, and I think they're doing well. But I think you should consider that as an option based on your end market. What we're probably most familiar with is the traditional CM model. Okay, so we have two avenues. CMs can buy your materials for you. They can build the product for you. You're paying in a certain amount of time. Or if you're with a more flexible contract manufacturing partner and you don't want to pay them or have them mark up the material, you can provide the material to them. And then your contract manufacturer isn't providing much more value than putting the black things on the green board for you. And quite frankly, as an emerging customer, maybe your time is better spent developing your product or raising funds or developing your market as opposed to running around and buying parts. So a model that excites me here at Arrow, having owned a contract manufacturing and a high reliability business and having been both a supplier and client to Arrow, a model that I've developed in the past few years here is really a hybrid. Okay, so this is a turnkey manufacturing supply chain model. Right? So what we're able to do is Arrow, is a $30 billion company. But we put a boutique program together where we leverage really a best-in-world supply chain model, and we avoid some of the costs associated with the traditional CM model, the marking up of the parts, and we put together, a real end-to-end supply chain solution for our emerging account base. So, going back to the story of my friend and his home theater install, if he were to leverage partners who would have either done the install or maybe generated the sales for him, he probably would have been orders of magnitude beyond where he was now. All right. So how do you choose the right contract manufacturing partner? This is a good question, and I think as you guys and girls are looking to bring a product to market, realize that two contract manufacturers can have exactly the same equipment. Their buildings are probably going to look, very similar. They're going to have a quality group, a buying group, manufacturing group. They're going to have a stock room. They're going to look very similar. But as you're vetting and making introductions, realize that they're going to be very different. All right, so you can have the same equipment, but the CMs can serve very, very different markets. All right, and you may find contract manufacturer number one, who looks the same as number two, serves purely medical, and they have a quality system that's designed for that. Contract manufacturer number two has a different quality system, a different set of folks, and the founder came from the toy industry and they manufacture consumer goods. So recognize that they're all very different, even though many of them will look the same. Okay. So if you plan to use a traditional CM model, I suggest doing your due diligence. All right. The bulk of you may be part of an incubator and accelerator community. So ask the folks around you who have they worked with. Depending on where your product, what type of product it's going to be. Start with making some trips to your regional partners. There's a lot of different questions you can ask them. You can ask about the quality system. Ask them about the supply chain that they use. You can ask these partners about the ERP or MRP system that they operate on. Those are three things that I would want to understand as I was contemplating engagement. Okay. If you're working with Indiegogo now and Arrow, you may want to consider, the more progressive hybrid model that we put together. Okay. Explore, look at a bunch of different options, and in the end, having an understanding of those different manufacturing sites is going to lead you to what you're going to feel comfortable with. Now, as you're going through the process, keep in mind that the manufacturing groups that get you from the tens and 20s of units, to the thousands, may not be your same partner as you ramp. Okay, so keep your manufacturer's ability to scale with your business in mind. All right, it's a lot of effort to make the introductions, understand the manufacturing group, build rapport, to find out that the market really likes your product, and you have to start all over again. Okay. The other thing I'll leave you with regard to choosing a contract manufacturing company is choose one that you want to be in. Choose one that you're important to. Okay. So if you look at the major tier ones, these are billion-dollar contract manufacturing corporations. They may not be too excited by the prospect of a $5 million opportunity. But, Arrow's boutique model, the regional CMs, they might be very, very excited to support your $100,000 needs. Okay, so make sure you have prominence. Make sure you are important to that contract manufacturer to the extent you can understand their supply chain, understand their ERP system and quality system, and if you can get a peek at their finances, those are things that are going to help posture you to pick a partner that can help you bring your product to scale without having to repeat it over. Okay, so again, as I was taking a look at this yesterday evening, we called this sourcing. And I think, if we were going to iterate this in the future, we'd probably want to call this sourcing and supply chain. Okay? So what factors should you consider in the sourcing or the supply chain? Similar to choosing a CM, you have a lot of options as far as sourcing your raw components. I'd say, again, I'm going to underscore the need to make the introduction of the major players similar to Arrow. You can, as you go through your early stages, it's probably very easy to source online through a catalog kind of distributor. But I'd urge you, even as you're doing that, get yourself aligned with a major technology company who can understand the business you're doing, or understand where you want to go. You want to learn their field sales team. They're going to introduce you to their technical staff. And I'm going to tell you, in all cases, they're going to be excited by you, excited by the opportunity to support a new product. They're going to provide you with software, app development, hardware support. You're going to get resource that you probably didn't think existed. Once you feel good about that electronics distributor partnership, foster it, okay? And I'm just sharing some of my observations. This industry isn't the used car sales industry. All right? This is a very professional business in the technology supply chain and manufacturing industry. I look at the Arrow account reps, and when I have the opportunity to travel with them, they're really technology consultants who are, available to you. And again, it's not just Arrow; it's any of the major players who are going to operate this way. Okay. So these guys and girls who are supporting you in the field with these major technology companies, they're wired a little bit different than the folks who are on the phone who are innovating a product. But they understand the emerging market. They understand the dynamics of supporting an emerging account, and they know the technology supply chain. Okay, so build some relationships and partnerships early on, and kind of bringing it full circle. In the end, your CM can buy the parts. You can kit the parts, but again, look at values. So start to look at these things through a lens of value and not price. Because if you end up providing your materials to the CM, you're not focusing on your product, you're not focusing on your market, you're procuring raw parts, and again, probably not the best use of an entrepreneur's precious time. Getting maybe just a little philosophical here, not everybody gets a shot at building a business, and not everybody has an idea that they can get to market, a product that can get to market. So most of you on the session are probably well along that way. So I'm going to go back to the notion of thinking about value and not the price as you're getting ready to manufacture. Okay. If your model supports it, my recommendation is kind of understand the supply chain, choose the supply chain, command it, but stay out of the day-to-day and the tactical. Focus your time on iterating your product, meeting with investors, selling your idea. Let your manufacturing partner, supply chain partner, because they should be both intertwined, take care of this part. Be smart and buy value. Don't get overcharged. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a minute. And be conscious of the real costs. Okay. Almost weekly, I can offer a emerging account, a domestic U.S. or a nearshore Mexico solution, and the owner will come and say, but I can get this device for 80 cents cheaper in China. And I get it. Now, but when you start to look at your sourcing and your supply chain, look at the value. What is the landed cost? What are the value-added taxes? And if for some reason something goes wrong in that supply chain, that 80 cents times 10,000 boards is washed away by one trip to China to understand and unweave and untangle the supply chain. So really, in this business, the selling price is relative, but it's the fine print that counts. All right, so let's talk about costs in the manufacturing cycle. And some of you may be very familiar with these. Some of these things might be new considerations, but let's walk through the costs. So there's tooling for custom parts and testing. So there's tooling associated with the raw circuit board. There's tooling associated with injection molded plastics. There's tooling involved with fixturing for testing or sheet metal. So that's something that you need to budget for. And depending on the product, that tooling, custom tooling, can be a very significant portion of the budget. Okay, so we talked about BOM cost. Be conscious of the BOM cost, but also think about your tooling cost. And again, earlier in the stage, you can identify a couple of partners and make those introductions. The more accurate you're going to be in estimating these costs. Understand your raw component costs. Okay. Understand the differences in labor. You're going to buy machine time. You're going to buy machine setup. You're going to buy direct labor time, which is folks doing things that the machines can't do. So as you're designing your product, or as you're thinking about the next generation, you want to drive that direct labor out of the product. That's going to enhance quality, bring your cost down. Something to be acutely aware of is tax and trade implications. Okay, so that's a complex area. If you're using a CM who's manufacturing in different parts of the world, and you're going to depot them in certain parts of your product in certain parts of the world, and you want to move it to yet other parts of the world, make sure you have a partner who can guide you through that process. And I would say don't commit to a customer until you understand the real costs. You could end up shipping a lot of product, very, very low margin if you don't understand that. And from a freight and logistics perspective, make sure you're aware of that. Okay. Now, preparing the budget. So as you progress, I would say work with your distributor, your technology supply chain distributor, to cost your BOM from day one. Okay. You'll have many iterations. Make sure you're keeping an active tally of the bill of material cost, every item that goes into this bill of material. But don't forget things like labels, or you've decided to put epoxy on a high mass component. That epoxy you chose might cost $80 an ounce. Okay, make sure you're thinking about those things so you don't get to the point of having a working prototype. You're ready to get this thing into production, and suddenly you have $3 a unit more in cost than you anticipated because you didn't capture that. Now, as you're costing your bill of material at every iteration, have your technology partner, Arrow, other major players, cost that for you. My recommendation is don't hand it all to a contract manufacturer or an outsourced supply chain partner and have them cost it for you. There's going to be an inherent markup on the material in there. You need to have a true cost, and that gives you grounds to negotiate with your manufacturing partner. So make sure you're doing that on your own. Get estimates along the way for labor. As you visit and vet the manufacturing partner, I would be very transparent, and I would have frequent touches with them as you're making design changes. I would say, if I move X to Y and Y to Z, how does that affect me? It does a couple of collateral things for you. They get familiar with you, they get familiar with your product, and at the end, you're not going to be surprised by a labor price that's overestimate. And then with regard to estimating, I would say always overestimate. Okay. Now, I've never looked at a business plan, and I'm very privileged to spend time with our emerging base, and I look at business plans weekly. I've never seen one that's not up and to the right. And as we get through the product realization process, I've never seen a product brought to market that didn't have some kind of unforeseen expense. Okay, so over budget, be prepared, and if you're one of the well-prepared few who come in under budget, that's fantastic. You know your stuff. Okay, so kind of what's next there. So the product's built. It's in process. You've gotten through this cycle. I would start to think about, what do I do on my next production run, or as I'm preparing my next iteration of the product, to take waste out of the entire process. Really, you want to drive profitability, okay? I would look at things like your contract manufacturing partner. Can they assemble parts, finished goods? Can they assemble things into a finished goods state? And could you negotiate with them to hold that finished good on your balance sheet? Maybe you pay them a small holding fee, but as you ship to your customers, your terms with your contract manufacturer maybe begin. So look for partners who are robust enough to help you drive waste out, advance your profitability with some of these things. Shipping rates. There's a good chance that the manufacturing partners or maybe the logistics, the forward logistics partners that you choose, have a better or a broader relationship with the major carriers. Whether truck freight or a home service. Look to leverage the shipping rates of these bigger companies. They're going to extend it to you. Okay. If you're shipping international, how do you avoid value-added tax? How do you ensure trade and tax compliance? All right, I mentioned that on the last slide. I'm going to mention it again. I've seen multiple companies, not where I was involved with from the beginning, but things that we might pick up midstream, and we're working to bring a product to market where we're knee-deep for a couple of weeks in a row trying to understand trade and tax compliance and make it easy for our customers. Other things that you should do now that the product's built is think about how do you preserve your cash. All right, so having been in that startup mode and growing my business, cash is king. It's the lifeblood, right? Work with your manufacturing partners. And there's things you probably want to, have broached or discussed earlier on, but now that your company is gaining traction and you have some momentum, I'd ask about deferring payment to the manufacturing group, while you ship an invoice to your clients. So again, you want to, maybe negotiate that finished goods stock with them. Ask them if you could leverage their balance sheet to the extent you can. And quite frankly, in today's market, semiconductor market, there's a lot of volatility in the supply chain. Both of these things would allow you to have some raw material in place at the contract manufacturer and allow you to have finished goods in place so you don't let your customers down just as you're beginning to sell. So, finally, I think as you get into the production, through the production cycle, I would be thinking as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, as somebody who has a new product or is innovating a new market, I would think about how not to get too wrapped around the axle of manufacturing, leverage those partners that you've done. I'd get out, seek investment and grow my business. So, with that, Nisha, I'm gonna hand it back over to you. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael, for that overview. Before we open to questions, I did want to highlight one entrepreneur's story. I know in the chat box, actually, there was a question about entrepreneurs who have worked with Arrow in Europe. So actually, Morten and Jan are co-founders of Anywhere. It's a pretty cool product. It's a smart adapter for your lamp socket. So it actually monitors temperature and humidity and pushes data directly to an app on your smartphone. Anywhere actually worked with the local Arrow team in Copenhagen, which is pretty cool, and that team actually ended up introducing them to a whole bunch of other teams around the world. Arrow helped Anywhere explore opportunities with potential manufacturing partners, and hopefully one of those partners will end up helping Anywhere actually produce their products pretty cost effectively. So just a cool story that I wanted to leave you guys with. So I know there were some comments about not getting a sales pitch. I did want to mention, though, that the Arrow certification program is totally free. What's really cool about it is really you get access to design tools, access to IBM Cloud, you get a complimentary engineering consultation, and many discounts on other products and services. So I do also want to call out that if you achieve certification, which actually means you have a feasible prototype, you do become eligible for things like flash funding, cash prizes, $1,000 off components and services, additional promo through both Indiegogo and Arrow. So lots of cool opportunities. I know if you see that Arrow Certified Technology badge on the slide in front of you, you also get to put that badge on your Indiegogo campaign page, which has actually proven to result in higher funds raised and higher contributions to your Indiegogo campaign. So lots of cool opportunities. Like I said, the program's totally free and open to any entrepreneurs who want to join, and it's really a great way to get a whole lot of additional help throughout your product development process. With that, we will definitely be opening up to questions. And so, Michael, I'm just going to start asking some questions of you. And the first one I'm going to start with is actually around when is the right time to start exploring contract manufacturers? Is it once you've gotten all those things on your preparation checklist said and done, or is it good to at least explore contract manufacturing opportunities before all those things are complete?
Oh, yeah, great question. I would do that as early stage as you are comfortable. So when you know you have an idea, you have a business, I think it's wise to connect with the contract manufacturing group. As you're setting the meetings and the sessions, I think as a courtesy to the contract manufacturing partner, probably let them know your stage and that you have a plan and you're at this particular stage and you're looking at potential partners. And I think by virtue of sharing your stage with them, you might end up getting some kind of collateral read and finding those who might be really good fits for you early on.
Great. We had a question around actually getting a little more insight into contract manufacturers' finances. So obviously if a contract manufacturer is privately owned, you don't have a lot of financial information about them and how kind of viable they are. Do you have any recommendations for folks trying to suss that out in terms of what contract manufacturer to go with?
So I think that's another. These are great questions. I saw that one come up while I was talking. I think that's very delicate. All right, depending on the. Let's assume you're not with a public company because then you wouldn't have to ask the question. Some of the CMs are very proud to tell you just how many dollars in sales they're doing, and some are a little less. I think that it's very fair to say, do you do $5 and $10 million in annual revenue? Do you do 30 to 100 million in annual revenue? That's a good indicator. I think you can do some reconnaissance in the market as well. So they're going to have a supply chain. You'll probably share that supply chain with the contract manufacturer, Arrow, the other formidable competitors, and you might get a link from somebody who says, I don't know about that CM, or you might say, oh yeah, they're stellar. So I think those are some kind of ways to get a peek under the covers, and then. Should you move to a stage where you're working, you've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're entertaining private equity, you have an order from Best Buy, I would then say, look guys, I don't need audited financials, but I need reviewed financials. I need to understand that you can meet my supply chain demand. And at that point, I would expect their CFO to present you with something that you in turn can give to your end customer or your potential investors, and you're working with a credible party.
That's great. Another question kind of around volumes. I know a lot of our entrepreneurs are definitely producing at a lower volume, than a typical large company. What type of volumes would make you stand out or a little more important to a contract manufacturer? What kind of volumes should you be going for or might just make you, be a little more prominent when talking to CMs?
So I think the market, actually I shouldn't say I think, I know the market tends to look at, contract manufacturers as tier 1, tier 2, 3, 4. Your local regional manufacturing group who might do $10 or $15 million in revenue may be incredibly excited at the prospect of just putting something on their lines, okay? This goes back to the point I made earlier about, as you're selecting the CM, you need to feel that you have prominence. You need to feel that your business is important to that contract manufacturer. If your volume is 100,000 and you're with a tier 1, I can tell you will not be important. If you have 100,000 units of a $50 product that you want to produce, and you're in, our hybrid program or a local CM, you're probably going to have a lot of prominence, and they're going to be very interested. So I think it's dependent on. I think the interest is dependent on the volume you're going to produce in and the volume that the contract manufacturer has set up to support. In all cases, make darn sure that you're important to them. Otherwise, I would move on to the next one.
Got it. There's a question about distributing products worldwide. I know that definitely comes up for a lot of our entrepreneurs as well, since crowdfunding allows you to raise from people located all over the globe. How should folks think about that as it relates to choosing a contract manufacturer?
So in putting a kind of a platform of technology contract manufacturing partners into the Aero portfolio, I can tell you why I chose that. I looked for contract manufacturers who had domestic headquarters first here in the United States, but then had copy exact facilities in other geographies or low-cost geographies. So if you can align with somebody that you have a, whether you're in, domestic U.S. or in Europe, find a somebody headquartered near you with reach into other geographies. This way, you learn one quality system, one management team, one operating model. They learn you, and they can help you move into other geographies.
Great. We do have a couple questions around pricing and cost, as you can possibly imagine. I know folks are asking, for specific examples and estimates. Do you have a good resource you can point folks to get a better estimate in terms of costs and other things that they should be considering, when they're thinking through how much manufacturing is going to cost to them?
Okay, so we're talking about manufacturing or bill of material costs each year?
You can cover both if you want.
Thank you. All right. So, from a manufacturing perspective, I think you just have to get out and do your due diligence. Find the manufacturers you like, bring in quotations, and review them. One's going to be high, one's going to be low, three are be kind of the same. Those are the three that I would look at. From a bill of material perspective, which frankly is going to drive most of your cost, probably 70 to 80% of the cost of your product, I would leverage that supplier network that you put together. And again, I'd be very transparent with them. I would work to foster a relationship where, as an emerging account, they're an extended part of my team. And, if you do it the right way, and can convey your message, they can carry that to the suppliers, to the ST Micro, to the Analog Devices, and lobby on your behalf. So, I think it's an iterative process. You're going to want to, work with, the best supply chain partners you can find, and as you're bringing that product to life, make sure that they're going back and telling your story to the suppliers. And more often than not, you're probably going to find that you're getting much better than a published or a book price that you'd see online.
Great. I think you also talked a little bit about getting a bill of material costs verified by a third independent party. I think you kind of touched upon that again, but do you have recommendations on third independent parties that actually do kind of verification of BOM costs?
So if it was interpreted as independent parties, maybe I was unclear, but I think the bill of material cost should be vetted, by the emerging customer, by the entrepreneur, directly with the supply chain or the distributor. Where I wanted to stress was not to allow an outsourced supply chain group or allow your CM to be the group who is costing your bill of material. You need to have that transparency. If you were transacting direct with your distributor, your cost is X. And then you can build from that on the labor that the CM is doing, the markup on the materials, and the conversion costs. So that gives you a foundation, okay? So make sure that you work directly with your distributor to cost it. I don't know how you would get a third party to cost it. I could say that you might want to chop it around a little bit, but my philosophy is I find really good partners. I find that very few of them, and I align with them, and hopefully I trust them to give me the best cost.
That's great. Focusing a little more on specific components, kind of along the same lines, do you provide consultancy on specific hardware components? If we don't have a lot of expertise in choosing specific components, is that something you can help with as well?
Yes. So, having moved out of the organization that I sold and into Arrow, I could have done a bunch of different things. But I took this role because it's absolutely interesting to me. And yes, the portfolio of services that we talked about at the very beginning is really kind of an end-to-end life cycle company. From informal or formal design, we can absolutely take the back of the napkin, put a block diagram in front of you that said, hey, here's two different processes. They'll do the same thing. Here's their cost. Here's the associated components around them. And here's where each one of these components are in its life cycle. So I know that our Indiegogo team does that direct, and our local sales teams, like every city, do that. So absolutely, we can make good recommendations of what parts, should be on your board based on your application. And we're not doing it, we're doing it really from a position in the middle as an orchestrator. There's no benefit to us to put Intel on a board versus TI on a board, okay? We're just saying, what are your inputs? What is the product outcome? And we look to our portfolio of franchise suppliers and put the best solution together.
Great. Kind of focusing on the prototyping section a little more, so not necessarily purely manufacturing related, but I know you and I, Michael, have talked a little bit about quick prototyping and trying to get that proof of concept for testing. Can Arrow help around that in terms of, actually getting to your prototype and kind of quick iterating on prototypes?
Yeah, so absolutely passionate about that. I think that is such an important gap between the design and the scale manufacturing. And I can tell you that I spend probably a fifth of my week tending to our prototyping business and how do we make it seamless to get from paper to prototype to scale. And our Indiegogo folks are on the phone as well. They can chime in if they like, but we put together a mechanism where, through Arrow.com, we upload your files. We can produce prototypes with partners, rapid prototype partners that, our quality team has walked the floor. Our engineers get involved and say, hey, you have the wrong size package capacitor spec'd out on the board, and get that feedback back to the entrepreneur. And then, so we help to solve the problem and still deliver in really rapid turnaround fashion. And we've also built out capability around rapid CNC, rapid 3D print, and I'm not talking desktop 3D printers, I'm talking industrial printers. We can print out of aluminum, titanium, as well as, quick turn, kind of 15-day soft tooling for injection molding. So we're laser focused on our offering around prototyping.
Awesome. We have a question around transitioning from a lower volume contract manufacturer, maybe producing thousands of units, onto a contract manufacturer that's doing much higher volumes, let's say millions of units. How do you make that transition happen? Do you have to start all over with tooling and everything?
So hopefully you have a good relationship with your, the manufacturer who got you to the thousands, because I think they can play a real big part in a productive handoff to the bigger company. So if you have that relationship, you're not starting over. Okay, there are a lot of lessons learned in your product. Going from ones and tens and 20s to thousands, where there's history on non-conformances, history on test anomalies. Those things, that data should make it a lot easier to get up to speed. Where I think you should consider some extra work is around the tooling that you might have put in place. The tooling to get to the tens of thousands is different than building millions, or maybe different. So if you put injection molding tooling together, I'd like to make sure that if I were the entrepreneur, I'd like to make sure that that can be reused. If there's test and hardware associated with the your low volume production. I'd like to see what can be used with the volume manufacturers you ramp. And they may come back to you and say, look, our process is just way more automated, and most of this is not going to be used. It's a sunk cost. So in that case, transfer the knowledge. All right, history nonconformances, supply chain history, field return feedback, those things. You already have this history now. You're already in production. You take that to your new manufacturer, and that should help you avoid some of the landmines that you hit on your first go-around.
Awesome. We have time for one more question. So we had a question actually around local manufacturers versus distributed contract manufacturers. So do good local manufacturers really make a difference? Should you have multiple contract manufacturers located in specific local areas if you're only targeting a certain set of regions?
Okay, so I think how to answer that. So
I stumped you on the last question.
Yeah. Well, what you're asking is, I see two things. If you're going to produce regionally with a local manufacturer, align with one local manufacturer. All right. When I hear people say, I'm going to dual source, I'm like, no, you're just creating double the headache. All right. Find the right partner, manufacture with one. If your business is going to be well served by somebody 20 miles down the road, do that. Now, if you're talking kind of industry 4.0 and you want to manufacture in region of use, that's a whole different animal, and I think that can be done really well as well. But what I would argue is you need to really understand your material supply chain so you can aggregate demand kind of like in a hub-spoke fashion and push that material so you're still getting the benefit of the aggregated materials demand and spend, and push that into the regions that you're looking at. And then you also have the associated quality and control. I mean, it's going to cost you 5 times to manage 5 different CMs than it does to manage one. Okay.
Great. With that, I know we have to wrap up on questions. I know there were lots of questions about flash funding. I do want to direct everyone to enterprise.indiegogo.com/arrow. That has a ton of information about the program, about flash funding eligibility. It should be able to answer all of your questions, I promise. There is also an email address, arw@indiegogo.com, that you can absolutely email if you do have more specific questions about your product or about anything about the program. With that, I just want to take the time to thank Michael for joining us today. We're really excited all of you were able to join today as well and hear about Manufacturing 101. And I hope you have a great rest of your day or evening, wherever you are located. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Nisha. Take care.